Welcome back to Troubleshooting Agile. Hi there, Jeffrey.
Hi, Squirrel. Squirrel, we're back here for part two of disagree and commit, and this time we want to be able to talk to people about what are the necessary and sufficient elements of disagreement. In other words, so if you want to adopt that disagree and commit style, um, how do you know you've started successfully, and how do you know when to stop? So we can avoid the failure modes we talked about last week, which is one is people forgetting to disagree, and second, people forgetting to commit. How do you think we should get into that?
Well, let's think about what success looks like. So, if we're having a successful disagreement, and by the way, I guess I should say this, lots of listeners will be thinking, oh my God, disagreement, that's bad. We don't want to have a disagreement. What we want to do is resolve it and come out with agreement. Yeah, it's got dis in the name. It must be bad. That's not my view, and I don't think it's Jeffrey's view. We think productive conflict is really helpful. The problem is lots of people only are familiar with the kind of disagreement that appears on television, where somebody says, "Oh my God, you jerk! You're an idiot! I'm going to get you! You know, you're hopeless." And that's the way they disagree in the boardroom or in prison or wherever the exciting drama is taking place. And that makes great television, but terrible business. So what we're going to try to talk about here is ways to have disagreements that are productive and helpful, but also get you really good results in your business. And that's why we were saying, don't forget to disagree. Disagree this way. So Jeffrey, what are those ways that you have in mind for having a productive disagreement?
Well, the good news is we've actually talked about this before. What I think is a very useful tool, which is the ladder of inference. We can put a link to that in the show notes. And as a reminder to listeners, the ladder of inference is a construct that comes from Chris Argyris, where he would talk about sort of a ladder that starts at the bottom in the pool of data. There's all the things that are happening around us that we could be sensing. And then from that pool of data, we have observations. From those observations, we have assumptions and so on. We build up this ladder until we get to our beliefs and then the actions we take in the world. So this ladder is the things that we climb from sort of stimulus to response. And the reason that I'm bringing in that construct is because that becomes a mechanism to help us understand where our disagreements take place and structure the conversation so that it doesn't become, insult and commit. So, and one of the key concepts that we talk about in the book with the ladder of inference is starting low on the ladder. So what we mean by this is rather than starting at the very top, you have that decision. I think that decision is wrong. I mean, or rather, we're not going to work our way down from there, but rather we're going to try to say, coming bottom up, what are the things that lead us to our disagreement? What is behind the disagreement we're having? So it might be helpful to illustrate this if we choose a scenario where you and I might disagree, Squirrel. So maybe something like, hey, we should schedule our recording session during Easter next weekend. Wouldn't that be great?
Yep, and that's something you and I disagree about. But Jeffrey, I might even suggest something that we disagree more strongly about. And I don't know if you're willing to go into this. We didn't prepare this one, but how about if we disagree about the practice of hunting? Because
Okay.
I'm a vegetarian, as listeners may or may not know, and most listeners probably don't know that Jeffrey, you've had some hunting experience. Did you want to talk about that? Would that be a good one? Because we have
Sure.
some
Yeah.
fundamental disagreements there.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that'd be a fun example.
Let's try that one then instead. So the way we'd work our way up the ladder of inference is each of us would be trying to discover the other's reasoning. So rather than saying hunting is bad, animals are good, Jeffrey, you're an idiot. What I say is I'm going to try to really understand how Jeffrey got from the interest that he has in the outdoors or something else that he observed to the point of deciding to head out into the woods with a rifle and try to find a deer. So, Jeffrey, I'm going to ask you some questions about how you got to that. and I hope that'll illustrate for our listeners how they might do it. That okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. So, Jeffrey, tell me about what you observed that made you think hunting might be the practice for you, a good thing that would be interesting for you to pursue.
Um, well, I think the something hunting I first came across as a child and hearing stories from my grandfather about how he grew up. And so that was probably my first exposure. And then also my grandfather would take my father and his and my uncles hunting. So in some sense, it kind of came in very early as something I expected to do.
Hmm. And which part of what you observed was most important? So it might have been that the being outdoors was important, that the connection to your family and your history was important. It might be something else. What out of the different things you observed, what did you see was important to you?
I think that the things that came to mind was that these were places where there were positive family memories. People would relate the stories of going and recall them and laugh, and they can describe the experience as being pleasurable and the memories as being pleasurable. So it was sort of in that part of it, building the shared experience. Um, was part of it, and then also that was the sort of collective stories of hunting together. But also there had been an element where essentially my grandfather had done some of the hunting for as a profession. He spent a winter where he was essentially trapping to make money to buy everything that he needed. So there was um, those are the things that stuck with me, is it both it being a uh, a useful thing to do and also something that built good memories.
Excellent. And what do those memories mean to you? So does that have a sort of cultural element for you? Is it a personal thing that you say, look, I want to have the happy memory of being out there in the woods hunting, or the great deer that I managed to kill? Something else? What's important to you? What is the meaning?
I think that there's kind of two parts. There's on the one hand the shared experience, um, and on the other hand is sort of the skill and the competence and confidence of being able to
Hmm.
um, uh, um, accomplish these things. My grandfather is a very accomplished person, could was very handy, could do a lot for himself, and so there's an element here of sort of a skill and um, competence angle to it.
Okay. So skill and competence, and how would you summarize the first one?
Well, so that's sort of the sort of as a shared experience, the happy memories with friends or family.
Shared experience with others and being able to demonstrate and develop skill and competence yourself. Did I hear that right?
That's right.
Excellent. Now, I make an assumption about that, and I don't know if you make the same assumption, so I want to check this. My assumption would be that then the deer's interest in sort of being a happy deer running around in the forest would be less important. So your assumption would be, hey, I'm getting some benefits here, and there's a deer, and I like deer. I want there to be more deer so I can hunt them, but their interests are come lower on the list. Is that accurate? I might be totally wrong about that.
Um, I think that's um, maybe something that I'm thinking less about. Um, the deer don't typically die gently bed surrounded by friends and family, holding their hooves. Um, the end of the animal in nature is still going to come about, and so I think when I think about shooting a deer, it's the comparison is what's the alternative end for the animal. So those things come in mind. So the experiences of the deer are factors that are considered in. I don't know that I put them in a strict hierarchy uh, uh, compared to my experience, but they are things I can consider.
Got it. And so what kind of beliefs then do you have that you come to from these assumptions? And I heard some conclusions there as well. So would you say you believe that you're doing good in the world by hunting, that you're creating positive things for yourself and others, and even I was hearing you say for the deer. Is that accurate, or would you summarize your beliefs a different way?
Yeah, no, I think that is accurate. I think this a lot of this has to do with, you know, hunting legally within a scientifically managed framework where they're looking at deer populations and whatnot and carrying capacity of the land. And in part, the goal here is to, making sure that uh, uh, the populations of the deer stay within um, uh, the carrying capacity of the land they're on. Um, then putting those things together, I do have the conclusion that, well, in the moment, of course, any given deer would probably prefer to not be shot and killed and eaten. That deer is actually having sort of one bad day compared to the relatively worse life of many factory farmed animals. Um,
Got it.
so
Okay. So we've climbed up the ladder in a very nice way there. Thank you, Jeffrey, for doing that with me. Actually, I hadn't had that conversation with Jeffrey because I've been curious about his reasons for taking up this particular sport. But what we can now do is identify exactly where I disagree with Jeffrey because I still very strongly disagree with Jeffrey. I'm not gonna. He hasn't convinced me, which could of course also happen. I might go up the whole ladder and I might say, "Hey, great, Jeffrey, where can I buy a gun?" But that didn't happen because we have a fundamental disagreement at the level of assumptions. I like the meanings, I like the data, I like the stories about Jeffrey's grandfather. But Jeffrey, if we're going to come to some conclusions about where we disagree, it's going to be where Jeffrey said, I think the deer can be benefited by this, and it's a better, it's one bad day for the deer. I think that these things are valuable and important, but I deal with them in a different way. For me, the deer is an important player in the play, and I'm going to be considering the deer's interests as that particular deer. Now, Jeffrey and I are not going to come to some different conclusion about that. He's not going to convince me, and I'm certain I'm not going to convince him to sell his gun. Um, but what has happened is we've figured out where we disagree and how we might commit. Because I could certainly commit to coming to visit Jeffrey and taking a nice walk in the woods, and even probably wearing an orange vest or something so that nobody would shoot me. But what I might agree to do is, I'll have create a nice positive memory, shared experience, enjoy nature. But Jeffrey, when it comes time for you to go out with the gun, I'm not coming along. But we found some common ground. We found some things that are helpful, and I could commit to supporting Jeffrey in the places where I agree with him, and not in others. So I hope this has been helpful to our listeners in just kind of a live, unrehearsed example of how you can have a productive disagreement. Jeffrey, how did it feel for you?
well, I'll say it sounds fine. But one thing I'll say is I don't know that listeners might say, where was this disagreement? You said like the difference in assumptions. Can you say a little bit more on that? I want to make that a bit sharper.
Absolutely. So I asked it to you, and I tried to play it up a little bit more than I might have done in a real business situation to illustrate it for listeners. That Jeffrey has a view about deer, which is very nuanced and thoughtful, and I hadn't understood that he had all those thoughts about it, and he thought about it clearly. But at the end of the day, he's putting some other considerations than the feelings of that particular deer on that particular day, which he says that deer does not want to be shot at that time and killed and eaten. And I'm making a different value judgment. I'm saying I think that deer's the ideas are and feelings and wishes are at a higher level for me than they are for Jeffrey. I rank things differently.
Right.
I don't disrespect Jeffrey for that. I don't think Jeffrey is a terrible person for having those views. I understand them much better than I did when we started this podcast. I just disagree with them, and I make a different value judgment. Is that helpful, Jeffrey?
Absolutely. And so the visualization I want people to think of here is kind of a ladder that starts with a base and then splits in half. So you kind of get to the point of assumptions, and then your beliefs follow from taking this different path. But we can chart at some point. We're agreeing, and we're accepting common things about data and whatnot. But we get to this point of assumptions and what you're valuing, and I think this is the key point. our decisions often come from our values, and we have different values. We're applying those values differently, and that leads to different results. Um, and uh, and that idea of like, well, we can say, here's the crux, here's the point in which we disagree. That's what we're going for, and how we know we've disagreed successfully, which is we can each describe our ladder and the parts that are in common and where they divide. And
And most
that's
importantly, you can describe the other person's ladder using their language. So now, if I wanted to talk with Jeffrey about some joint activity we might do in the woods, I might talk about, hey, could we create one of those memories, and could we have some real competence and some excitement that we can show things that we're good at, but maybe it could not involve guns. um, and that would be then a way for us to find a negotiated agreement that might be good for both of us, and we don't have to have a negative outcome from our disagreement, because I'm able now to describe Jeffrey's reasoning in his language. And I'm always telling my coaching clients this: find out their language, use the way that they speak about it to sharpen your disagreement, as we just did. And we don't have time for it in today's podcast, but I'd encourage Jeffrey to ask me the same list of questions. And then if he wanted to talk with me about things that are important to me that lead to my vegetarianism and my wish not to kill deer, we might make a better decision about what to put on our pizza, for example.
That's right. And maybe it's worth saying is that what we're trying to illustrate here is that for me, one of the key ideas is that you can have this tool, this aid, which is the ladder of inference, and then and that's available as a guide when things are potentially emotionally difficult, and it might be hard to be curious about the other person. I use this as kind of a checklist. Do I understand where they're coming from? Can I play back how they got there? That Squirrel was stressing using their language. That's my goal in a disagreement, to be able to reflect back to the point that the person will tell me, yeah, that's right. You understand. And it's sort of until I have accomplished that, then I don't really feel like I understand their side. Once I've accomplished that, now I can ask for role reversal. Okay, I've demonstrated that I understand your position. I'd like to illustrate mine, and now we can find out what points we disagree on. But that, to me, the key thing is that even in something that can be very emotionally fraught, the tool is there as a guide I can use to make sure I've checked all the boxes on the disagreement, and I really understand the other person from their point of view.
And, Jeffrey, just to bring it back around to what we talked about last week, I had an example of a person I was coaching, and, kind of vigorous disagreement with his boss. He was really unhappy about it. Now, I didn't hear the whole story, but I did actually talk to the boss later. And what I found out was that the boss's position was somewhat different than my client thought, and that they had had a conversation about it. Now, I don't know how that came out. I don't know all the details. But what has happened again and again and again when people have had a productive disagreement, like Jeffrey and I just tried to illustrate, is that you find out, number one, some of the things you thought are not true. So I found out that Jeffrey has some more nuanced thoughts about how deer feel about being shot than I had understood. And so I have a different approach to Jeffrey now when I talk to him about this topic. And you come up with some different ideas for joint action. And as far as I know, my client has not, been unable to cooperate with his boss. He has found some way to move forward. So I'd encourage our listeners to try this the method of the ladder of inference. Sometimes we call it test-driven development for people, for the engineers in the audience, because it feels like test-driven development. You're making slow steps up a ladder. You're discovering things about, in this case, not your code, but the other person. I'd encourage our listeners to try that. There'll be a link in the show notes to more of our writing on it. And if there's a place where you think you need to disagree and commit, where you're being asked to do that, make sure that you actually have a disagreement of the kind that we were trying to illustrate, because you may get a much better result than if you just shut up and commit, as we talked about last week. What do you think, Jeffrey?
Absolutely, and you can avoid that failure mode, as well as the failure mode of like knowing when to stop. So hopefully this has been useful in both cases.
Absolutely. And of course, one thing that would tell you you know enough to stop is I know I'm at the place where I need to stop is when I know how those ladders divide. Now I understand the other person's position. I don't need to debate it further. Jeffrey and I are never, by just talking to each other, going to come to a common opinion about hunting. But what can happen is we can get to better outcomes. So,
That's right.
if listeners would like to disagree with us in a productive way, then we really enjoy that. We like it when people tell us we're wrong. So, if you think we're wrong about hunting, we're happy to hear it. But even more, if you tell us that you have a different way of dealing with disagree and commit, if you have situations you think aren't suitable for the ladder of inference, any of that kind of stuff, we'd invite your disagreement. And the way to do that, the way to communicate it to us, is to go to agileconversations.com, and there you will find our book and conversational dojos information on how to practice these things in a safe format, in a way that can let you score your performance and learn more from other people. And there's lots of different ways to get in touch with us, and you can use any or all of those. Of course, the other way to keep in touch with us is to come back again next week when we'll have another edition of Troubleshooting Agile. Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thanks, Squirrel.